If it's Friday, Biden's shaky standing, the president's poll problems are just one of the reasons Democrats are still getting nervous about 2024, even as Donald Trump continues to rise on the Republican side. As the White House issues a new response to whistleblower accusations that the DOJ interfered in the Hunter Biden case. Plus, Republicans wrestle with the abortion issue. 2024 GOP hopefuls head here to Washington, or have already been here, actually, to speak to some of the country's leading evangelicals 1 year after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And extreme weather threats. We've got a scorching heat wave, deadly tornadoes, and 2 tropical storms churning up the Atlantic in what could end up being a more extraordinary hurricane season than we thought. Happy Friday. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting from Washington. As we begin the hour, President Biden is set to speak here in Washington on reproductive rights, a day before the anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Biden and the Democratic Party may not be saying it out loud, but they're grateful they have the abortion issue to energize voters ahead of 2024. And they're hoping that abortion rights, combined with the ever-looming presence of Donald Trump, are enough to convince voters that another 4 years of Biden as president is better than the alternative. And as you know, alternative is a key word here. But will that be enough to overcome the problems facing the president's 2024 campaign? What if his numbers look more like Hillary Clinton 2016 than they do Joe Biden 20? A new Pew poll shows that his job approval rating is wallowing in the mid-30s. That's down from the 41% that our NBC News poll tracked for the president at the end of April. We'll have new NBC News poll numbers coming out this Sunday on Meet the Press. Check your local NBC station. But the concern is not just about Biden's poll numbers. There's also nervousness that early fundraising isn't delivering the way they hoped, according to some reporting by Politico, even as the campaign says they're in a good place. And while Biden doesn't have a real primary challenger, the gadfly gambit by RFK Jr. isn't helping the campaign. Biden could very likely lose Iowa and New Hampshire since his campaign has decided to make South Carolina the first ballot Biden's name will appear on. So he's almost setting himself up for some negative early publicity there in Iowa and New Hampshire. Meanwhile, national Democrats are wary, and that's to be kind here. They're very concerned about the third-party no-labels ticket because they think that ticket could be a spoiler. And what Biden has accomplished as president may not be resonating. The governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, called Biden's impact, quote, grossly underestimated, but he also warned, quote, they're having a challenging time connecting the achievements of the Biden administration, connecting it to real lives and real job creation. And to add to all of that, the legal issues surrounding the president's son, Hunter, the latest of which is an accusation by 2 credible IRS whistleblowers claiming misconduct by the Department of Justice and the FBI during the investigation of Hunter Biden. According to transcripts released by the Republican-led House and Ways and Means Committee, one of those whistleblowers, who, by the way, was questioned both by Democrats and Republicans on that committee, former senior IRS agent Gary Shapley, he alleged that Hunter Biden received preferential treatment from the DOJ. Shapley asserts that the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney leading the probe was blocked in his efforts to charge Hunter Biden with more serious crimes than the tax-related misdemeanors Biden agreed to plead guilty to earlier this week. In a press conference this afternoon, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, pushed back on lawmakers who have, quote, chosen to attack the integrity of the Justice Department. And he said the prosecutor in Hunter Biden's case was given complete authority.
I'd be happy to. As I said at the outset, Mr. Weiss, who was appointed by President Trump as the U.S. Attorney in Delaware and assigned this matter during the previous administration, would be permitted to continue his investigation and to make a decision to prosecute any way in which he wanted to and in any district in which he wanted to. Mr. Weiss has since sent a letter to the House Judiciary Committee confirming that he had that authority. I don't know how it would be possible for anybody to block him from bringing a prosecution, given that he has this authority.
So fresh off that plea deal, the president's son was spotted last night attending a state dinner for the Indian Prime Minister. Hunter Biden is, of course, not running for office, but in presidential politics, optics can matter. And he represents what could be a major blind spot for his father in 2024. And again, as a father, everybody understands when you're dealing with somebody who's dealt with the problems that Hunter Biden's dealt with in his personal life, particularly with drugs and addiction, on one hand. On the other hand, was the state dinner a good idea? Monica Alba is at the White House. Garrett Haake joins me from the Capitol. Monica, let me start with you. Any White House response to the decision to invite Hunter Biden to the state dinner?
Well, we did ask about it in the briefing earlier this afternoon, Chuck. We actually pressed them on a number of questions related to Hunter Biden and all these developments over the last couple of days with respect specifically to him attending the same state dinner that the Attorney General was also invited to and did attend. The White House said simply he is the president's son, that the president has every prerogative to invite members of his family to an event such as this one, and that is what he did. I specifically asked White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre whether the president spoke to Attorney General Garland last night, because as we know, in the last couple of weeks or so, not just with the news of this plea agreement deal with his own son, but the indictment into former President Trump. After that, President Biden vowed essentially not to speak to the Attorney General about any of these kinds of cases that are so sensitive within the Department of Justice. And Karine Jean-Pierre told me, I can't tell you whether they spoke or not. She said she wasn't privy to that kind of information and didn't know everybody the president spoke to last night. So that just gives you a little bit of a window into, if nothing impropriety-wise, just the optics challenge here. The fact that the president's son was at this dinner, which for all we know, this was long planned. And then when the development and the news came a couple of days ago, they decided to just stick with the plan. But we did press them on whether any consideration or discussion was had about what it might look like, what questions it might raise. And the White House didn't want to get into any of that, essentially defending the president's decision to have his family there, saying there's no issue with that, and not wanting to really go beyond or answer more questions.
Is there... have you had any indication where White House staff has tried to intervene here?
So this is something that dating a long time back, for years in this circle, we know that the president has, of course, had such a complicated feeling and approach to how the media and others have reported on Hunter Biden at what many would say were some of his lowest points in his life, and that the president maintains he's incredibly proud of his son. And in fact, in the White House, in terms of trying to answer some of this a little bit, they said they weren't going to comment on this at all earlier in the week, except to say that the president and first lady love Hunter and that nothing else was going to be said. And now today they are putting out an additional statement that I think speaks to this question a little bit, which is reiterating some of that, but now trying to say very plainly that the president has never done any kind of business with his son, and that the Department of Justice remains independent here, as has been in this case, that the White House was not involved. But more than anything, they're proud, they maintain and say that the president feels the way that Hunter has rebuilt his life for him is an incredible source of pride that he's going to continue to talk about and tout.
Monica, one place to start, has there been any thought of either Hunter Biden or through Hunter Biden's lawyer that he say whether or not those phone calls and text messages that are quoted by him, that when he referred to his father, do we know whether his father was actually in the room?
No, and I asked Karine Jean-Pierre that exact question as well. I said, can you state definitively whether on July 30th, 2017, that text message you're referring to that was referred to by the IRS whistleblower, again, somebody under sworn testimony, a former government official who is alleging this, whether she could speak to that in the White House. And specifically, Karine Jean-Pierre told me, I have not spoken to the president about that. I asked her, do you plan to? Can you get us that answer? And she said, Chuck, no, I don't plan to speak to him about this, and I don't plan to address this from the podium. And that's why you're having other folks in the White House, like from Oversight and Investigations, having to address this from a different way, but certainly not on camera and not at the podium, which in many ways creates more questions about this issue.
Monica Alba, really nice work there today. Thanks very much. Let me move over to Garrett Haake. Garrett, you know, for the longest time, all of this whistleblower talk, you know, it was not clear whether there was there. These transcripts, who these people were, the second whistleblower, these look pretty credible. What kind of reaction have you gotten on the Hill today?
Chuck, it's kind of ironic because I think, as you point out, the various oversight efforts by different Republican House committees to find a handle on a Hunter Biden scandal that would really break through have been pretty weak. They've frankly been pretty feeble at times. They've got more of the goods here than they have elsewhere. And again, that's a very low bar. But what they have here, sworn testimony from serious people, current IRS officials, one of them quite senior, making these allegations. Ironically enough, these claims haven't gotten the same kind of breathless treatment that some of the other more fantastical claims that have amounted to less have from Republican lawmakers.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with Ukraine. This has nothing to do with China, right? This goes back to just simply what he was doing with his business, right?
Right. I mean, there's good old-fashioned business malfeasance in here, basically paying for flights for prostitutes and writing them off as business expenses. And I mean, there's a lot in here, and it hasn't quite landed. Maybe it's the sort of less sexy packaging of a whistleblower's testimony from a Ways and Means committee. This is not the committee where Republicans had basically bet the farm, on oversight or on judiciary or on the newly formed weaponization committee, which has basically whiffed on everything that it's approached here. They would be the one to find something that kind of like shakes the Biden foundation in some significant way. This, I don't know that it does that, but it comes much closer. Now, also, Chuck, it's worth pointing out that the House is finishing up a 7-week run in session. Working 7 weeks in a row is pretty normal for most Americans, but for the House, it's pretty unusual. They left town this morning. There may not just be a lot of wind left in the sails to really engage on this right now. We'll see if that's different when they come back potentially rejuvenated from their holiday break.
Very quickly, impeachment, expungement? Is this just a manufactured resolution? Because there's nothing in law about it.
Yeah, the short answer is basically yes. I mean, we've looked into this. Our in-house historian, Kyle Stewart, kind of poked around on this. The House can pass a simple resolution which says we don't think Donald Trump's impeached anymore. But as another colleague from another network put it up here, you could pass a resolution expunging Tuesday from the calendar this past week. It doesn't change the fact that expungement, that Tuesday happened, right? Like, we all saw it. We all lived it. The former president went on trial twice. Those things occurred. And when Kevin McCarthy was asked about this earlier, his answer was very thin. He tried to pivot to saying, John Durham's report indicated that this impeachment should have never happened. Listen to what he told me when I kind of tried to press him on that.
In what way does Durham indicate the impeachment shouldn't have happened?
Exactly what he said. That he said they shouldn't have gone forward with it based upon the information that they had, that they knew the information wasn't true.
Donald Trump wasn't impeached on anything related to Durham. He was impeached on the Ukraine, and he was impeached on January 6th. It has nothing to do with Durham.
Now calm down. You found from every action of what they've taken, especially Adam Schiff lying to the American public, I think it is appropriate, just as I've done before. You should expunge it because the mission is on.
So, Chuck, this effort to conflate Durham, which has to do with the beginning of the Russia investigation, which with either impeachment, which have nothing to do with the Russia investigations, is just, I think, an indication that this is another attempt by some House Republicans to just muddy the waters around defending Donald Trump by any means necessary.
Garrett Haake, quite a busy week, particularly with the House Republicans.
It always is.
It always is, isn't it? Garrett, thank you very much. Let me bring in panel, Eugene Scott, senior politics reporter to Axios, Simone Sanders-Townsend, the former senior advisor to the Biden campaign, host of Simone on MSNBC, and Sarah Fagan, Republican strategist and, of course, a Meet the Press contributor. Simone, I'm going to start with you because you dealt firsthand with the president as a candidate with all this Hunter Biden stuff. Anybody who's a parent can't imagine losing a child. He's had a lot of loss. I understand what he's doing as a father. But it does seem as if he has a political blind spot here in some of these appearances. Is he hard to have a conversation with about these things, Hunter?
I wouldn't say it's hard to have a conversation with, the president about Hunter, but also, as you said, any parent, and Joe Biden is a parent. Mm-hmm. And when in any parent, he does not look at Hunter as anything other than his son. And
State dinner was just a terrible idea. With Garland there,
this is Joe Biden that he should uninvite his son to a state dinner.
But with Merrick Garland in the room, again, Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch bumped into each other on a tarmac, and Loretta Lynch had to recuse herself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, also the Obama administration was notoriously risk-averse.
Fair enough.
Very extremely risk-averse.
I guess what you're saying is Biden a little less risk-averse?
I mean, I don't want to say he's a little less risk-averse because there's like 3 people at the White House that can call over to the Justice Department, and all of them work in the White House counsel's office.
Right.
But I would say he's a parent, and I don't think that I would be hard-pressed to believe that there was a full-fledged analytical conversation about whether Hunter should attend. I think it was a foregone conclusion that he was.
And it just feels like one of those things that staff knows it's not worth the aggravation. Maybe.
I mean, Kareem was so honest at the podium. They're like, Monica Alba, absolutely right.
I'm not going to go there and ask.
She said, I won't be asking. Well, thank you.
Wow. Sarah Fagan, it's interesting to me that it wasn't James Comer or Jim Jordan that got this Hunter Biden stuff. It was somebody that hadn't been waving around papers claiming to have all this crazy stuff. It was Jason Smith, the Ways and Means chair. It is interesting to me that it was sort of a more methodical approach to these things versus sort of the grandstanding approach.
Well, it's like a traditional legislative approach, which is let's get all of our facts lined up and let's get all of the goods, so to speak, before we go out. And look, you know, all of these issues, whether it's the state dinner or the whistleblower or all the pictures that show up in tabloid press, they all create an environment that makes it harder for Joe Biden to run for re-election. It creates just doubt, ickiness, even if it's unfair. And so for them to put him out last night, it just struck me as, I get it, I understand, it's painful for the family, but you've got to.
It's not fair, but welcome to politics.
You're not a normal family, so you've got to think about things politically, right?
Eugene, does this leave a mark?
I think it could. I mean, obviously, you have Republican voters who have already made
it's a done deal, right?
It's
They've
done.
already made it, yeah.
But I think what the president needs to figure out is a message and a response that will connect with swing voters or voters who are interested and want to know more, but aren't assuming
You think he needs to address it, maybe just once, but address it? Look.
Something has to be said because the Republicans are going to keep talking. I mean, the reality is, although recess is about to happen, the number of Republican lawmakers who have addressed this on social media and on conservative media has already grown, like in the last 24 hours, and that's going to continue.
The whistleblower charges, the admission of guilt, you know, essentially, or the charges on top of the whistleblower, which is going to be added fuel, it's going to add to this. It's not going to take it away. It's only going to build from here.
What exactly does the president need to say? I understand if someone's saying Hunter, but like I understand if maybe folks want to hear more from Weiss and the Justice Department about what he believes was nefariously happening inside the Justice Department and Garland blocking him. But what exactly does the president need to say? Because the questions about his, like Hunter Biden's business dealings, there was extensive conversation, I recall, in 2020.
Oh, I think it's important to restate to swing voters that, look, I love my son. I'm going to support my son whatever happens, but he's going to face whatever consequences he has.
He pled guilty,
Right. And you could say, I'm proud of my son for facing up to the... But I think he's got to acknowledge guilt.
And he might not need to say anything new. To your point, like he's already provided answers, but we know
now that there's a new event.
Actually, let's not forget that he has said that there's no there to anything. That was the president's position the entire campaign, that there was no there, and there actually is there, and they pled guilty to it.
Which there, though? See, that's what I see. This is the mudding of the waters I think that you're talking about.
Well, this goes to this was the specific issue that he's dealing with. And the thing is, it's what Garrett pointed out. This is not this Ukraine conspiracy theory.
No, it's not. But that was the question on the table, and that is the conflation.
Yeah, that is the conflation. This makes abortion that much more important, doesn't it?
Well,
I mean, where would this campaign be? Where would Democrats be without abortion?
I think it would be a different environment, completely, right? But I mean, that's the same thing to say, like, where would people be if Donald Trump had never been president, right? There are a lot of what ifs.
Where would we be if shame still mattered in American politics?
Come on now, shame from the House floor the other day. So I think that the reality is that this is the situation that the Republican Party apparatus finds themselves in is in fact a situation they brought upon themselves. For 50 years, they organized to repeal Roe, and then Roe got repealed. They didn't have a plan, a cohesive plan, which is why you have the Republican candidates across the country, presidential candidates all over the board when it comes to where they stand, and voters believing, a number of voters, at least 1/3 of Republican voters in the NBC poll say, hey, we think abortion should be protected.
And this gets me at something, Eugene, that I think we don't we don't correctly articulate where the public. There is no divide. There's not a divide on abortion in America.
There isn't.
There's more of a consensus than a divide. There's a political divide. And the division is actually inside the Republican Party more than it is inside the Democratic Party. And this feels like the Republican Party's not there yet. I don't want to speak for you, Sarah, but that's what it looks like to me. They've got to figure out what their position is.
Well, in the meantime, Democrats are trying their best to articulate to the American public what the GOP position is. I interviewed Catherine Clark, the whip, and she has argued that what Republicans want is a national abortion ban. The reality is we know that not all Republicans are on the same page about this, but there are Republicans who have been very clear that that's the direction in which they would like the country to go. And until enough of them get on the same page and kind of figure out some message, Democrats are going to try to own it.
Sarah, there was an interesting aspect in our poll, a question we've been tracking. Has access to abortion gotten easier or harder or stayed about the same in your state? And then what do you think overall nationwide? What was astonishing was how many people are paying attention to what's happening in other states, not just their own.
Right.
This feels as if the party's going to get defined by its most extreme position, maybe not by what its position is. Is that what you think is going to happen?
Well, I think that,
or how do you avoid that?
I think, look, if you look back after Roe, I think the pro-life movement kind of splintered a little bit in the sense that they had won a victory. And, it's very clear that they have to articulate a message of hope and, progress for family. And, they can't sort of just lay back because the Democrats are going to define the position as opposed to, allowing them to sort of put out an alternative argument. I mean, the reality is abortion is a very complex issue. Most people agree that there should be some abortion in the United States. You pointed that out. But boy, once you get past that layer, it is much more compleast.
Right.
And the Democrats actually have the more extreme position. And that, to me, is
but this was pre-Roe. I understood that argument
no.
pre-Roe. But doesn't that argument go out the window post-Roe?
So it is unacceptable in the Democratic primary today to be for anything other than abortion at any point.
Is it? I would argue it's about the same on the Republican primary side. You can't be a pro-choice Republican and win a primary.
I don't disagree with you. But my point is that the notion that Republicans are over here on one extreme and Democrats are for just consensus, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Now, the reality is the Democrats have done a very good job on this issue of convincing the public that the Republicans are the extremists, and Republicans need to do a better job of counterbalancing those arguments.
Is there policy where they can support their argument, though? I mean, I think that's the problem.
Well, there's certainly division. There's certainly division about, whether we should have any ban or a 16-week ban or, a full-on ban. There's no doubt that people of the party are in different views on this, and that creates the challenge, and it creates the challenges in the primary. But, to your poll, your conversation on the poll, Democrats can hide behind abortion. It's been a very effective political issue for them. At 35% approval rating, Joe Biden is not getting reelected, and he's not beating Donald Trump with those numbers.
Look, I think that Donald Trump's positions have been the positions that he has ran on have proved to be not popular with the people that he needs to win an election, whether it was the last presidential election or the midterms in 2022. But particularly when we talk about the issue of abortion, women are dying, have come close to death. The stories that are being told, and that's not hyperbole. The idea that the conversation at this point, the conversation at this point is not theoretical. It is about whether women and their families and their doctors are the people able to make the decisions about their bodies, or what Republicans are saying is actually, we think we should legislate that.
I will say this.
If that is not the discussion, then show me the evidence, because the evidence says that is, in fact, where it shakes out.
Look, I'm short on time, but this issue of OBGYN access in rural red states, this is going to be something that I think is something that Republicans have to focus on soon in some of these places. But we will see. Eugene, Simone, and Sarah. Kind of a contentious week in American politics, huh?
Never have that.
The day must have ended in Y. We've got more about all of this in just a moment. Coming up, faith and freedom in the field. As we were just talking about, some 2024 Republican candidates call for federal abortion bans. Chris Christie gets booed at a key conservative conference. We'll have those moments and more next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. 1 year since the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, Republican presidential candidates are addressing the issue of abortion with evangelical voters today in Washington, D.C. 7 White House hopefuls spoke at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's annual conference today here in Washington. Former Vice President Mike Pence urged all candidates to pledge to impose nationwide restrictions if they become president.
So I want to say from my heart, every Republican candidate for president should support a ban on abortion before 15 weeks as a minimum nationwide standard.
Meanwhile, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis touted actions they've taken at the state level to restrict access to abortion.
Let me tell you, it was my honor to sign over 30 pro-life bills. And Arkansas has been ranked, after 8 years of my leadership, as the #1 pro-life state in America by Americans United for Life.
We have also delivered in Florida on promoting a culture of life. And that means signing the heartbeat bill into law that protects unborn children when there's a detectable heartbeat. It was the right thing to do. Don't let anyone tell you it wasn't.
While that's likely what evangelical voters want to hear, that's not where a majority of Americans are. As we first showed you yesterday, our NBC News poll shows that 61% of voters still disapprove of the Dobbs decision 1 year later. More than half, 53%, say that abortion access in this country is too difficult. So those numbers, along with today's Faith and Freedom Conference, show the challenges that lie ahead for the anti-abortion rights movement. They call themselves, of course, pro-life. My colleague Kristen Welker has more.
For half a century, anti-abortion activists were united around a singular goal: overturning Roe v. Wade. Now, 1 year after the constitutional right to an abortion was struck down, activists in the anti-abortion rights movement are speaking out about the future, including Carol Tobias, president of the National Right to Life Committee.
I can't believe how fast this year has gone. So much has happened. We're not protecting as many of those unborn children as we would like, but we have the opportunities. We have a lot of opportunities ahead of us.
And Kristen Hawkins, president of Students for Life of America.
I think just for this generation to be able to see this huge seismic shift take place, I don't think the cultural change has even yet been measured from just that one decision.
While these advocates say they are still united in their primary goal to end abortion services nationwide, there are divisions about how to achieve that aim.
If you don't believe abortion is a federal issue, you have no business running for federal office.
I think going for any kind of national ban at this stage is not possible. Even if you're looking at something like 12 or 15 weeks. There's not the support for that kind of legislation.
The divide creating a patchwork of approaches. The challenge now, refining a strategy.
It is federal, it is state, and it is community. And that is where we engage, whether it's on campuses, changing hearts and minds, whether it's in the community promoting nonviolent alternatives for families and mothers in crisis, or whether it's here in Washington or a state capitol.
Real-world factors about the impact of abortion restrictions on women's health care pose serious questions. A 2020 study from the Commonwealth Fund, which supports independent research on health care issues, found that in states where abortion is restricted, the maternal death rate was 62% higher than in states with access to abortion care.
How does that impact you to hear that figure?
I'm appalled that the numbers are as high as they are in the United States. We need to do better, but that does not justify or cannot be used as an excuse to kill more unborn children.
Meanwhile, organizers like Mark Lee Dixon are fighting at the grassroots level.
The overturning of Roe v. Wade did not slow down my life. Just increased it.
Dixon, who marched outside the Capitol on January 6th, but who denounced the violence during our interview, says he is appealing to city councils to ban abortions at the local level, hoping to create what he calls sanctuary cities for the unborn. So far, he says he has succeeded in 65 local areas.
If an abortion facility moves into a community, it's not their state capital's problem or their nation's capital's problem, it's their problem. When the discussion was thrown to the states that legislators could no longer say, we're waiting on the Supreme Court, that the ball was in their court to do something.
We pressed him on how he justifies urging city councils to not follow federal and state laws.
What do you say to people that's creating chaos and undercuts law enforcement?
I don't think it creates chaos at all, because the very heart of what these ordinances and laws are being used for, it's to protect innocent human life.
Dixon's latest target, Snowflake, Arizona, population 6,300. Abortion is already illegal in Arizona after 15 weeks.
It's really a religious community. We all believe in the right for life, that they would choose life. And so it's really important that it stays that way.
But in other places, Dixon's anti-abortion platform is enraging some residents. In Gallup, New Mexico, where Dixon's proposal is being considered and facing some intense opposition.
I went to nursing school before many of you were born, and I saw the results of illegal abortions. People that use coat hangers, people that use toxic chemicals injected into their uteruses.
Facing a campaign year when abortion politics will animate voters across the political spectrum, a new test for this movement after it achieved its decades-old goal, searching for a new strategy and seeking new candidates to carry forward this deeply personal and political debate. Kristen Welker, NBC News, Washington.
As you already know, we devoted a special half hour to Abortion in America 1 year later, a Meet the Press special. You can watch it right now on NBCnews.com or just go over to YouTube. Ali Vitale has been at Faith and Freedom all day today, and she joins me now. So, Ali, it was interesting. They came in and out, right? They all wanted to catch their flight so they could get to, Des Moines, Manchester, Columbia, important places like that in the primary calendar. We did some highlights on this. What was some of the most intriguing takeaways that maybe our cameras didn't catch?
Yeah, look, I think obviously the fact that the former Vice President Mike Pence is trying to make a litmus test here for the rest of the field, saying that everyone should support a 15-week national ban on abortion. I think it's notable, especially as we've watched people like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump all sparring for, what the right number is here in terms of the numerical week mark that should be litigated around. But then also, if there's a role for a national abortion ban, period, that's an active conversation within this primary. But I do think that the other thing that was significant here, too, is we're watching these candidates now try to take Trump on, contrasting him on policy. You're seeing that from people like Pence and DeSantis. But then you've got someone like New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who comes in here and does not center his speech around the policy items that many of the rest of the candidates did, like the courts, like abortion. Instead, he centered it, in his words, around character, and made this a referendum against Donald Trump as someone who he said has let people down. As he said that, there were boos here. Here's just a snippet of what that looked and sounded like.
I'm running because he's let us down. He has let us down because he's unwilling. He's unwilling to take responsibility for any of the mistakes that were made, any of the faults that he has, and any of the things that he's done. And that is not leadership, everybody. That is a failure of leadership. And you can boo all you want.
And look, Chuck, you and I both know that Christie is not someone easily deterred by some boos in the room. But when you talk about what the cameras might not have picked up, as I was standing here on the riser listening to folks react, yes, there were the audible boos. But I also then heard from some people in the back shouting, "That's true," speaking to what Christie was saying about the former president and the likely standard bearer of the party. It does represent the people who most of these candidates are trying to appeal to, the ones that maybe don't want Trump again, but want people who will still represent conservative values. So even though Christie seems like he's going to be walking that lonely road coming to events like this, earning those boos, it is something I think that's an outlier in terms of the way these candidates are handling that, even at big cattle calls.
It's almost like Christie's like the official protester of Donald Trump. The way you might have protesters follow around the candidate, and that's what he's going to try to do and see if he can somehow win over converts. It's something. Ali Vitale at Faith and Freedom. Now an empty hall. Get out of town Friday. Good luck. Thank you.
Last one standing.
All right. Well, nice work. Up next, big victory for the Biden administration. Frankly, it's a big victory for federalism, folks. And it's also about border policy. That's at the Supreme Court. But first, life is a highway. And look at this, Philly's mascots want to ride it. That's right, Philadelphia's favorite sports icons, not named Mike Schmidt and Jalen Hurts, were among the very first passengers to drive over I-95's newly created temporary roadway that reopened a stretch of I-95 to all cars today, less than 2 weeks after that fiery bridge collapse and months ahead of what was originally predicted. Look, this is still temporary. They still have to finish, but I-95, you can take it. Boy, sometimes government, when they put their mind to it, can get something done. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are nearing the end of the Supreme Court's term, and there are still some major decisions we're waiting for. The biggest one, of course, having to do with affirmative actions. But we did get a few rulings today, and a fairly significant one that was handed down. The Supreme Court backed the Biden administration's authority to decide what to prioritize in its immigration and deportation policy, ruling that the attorneys general who filed suit on behalf of the states of Texas and Louisiana did not have standing to block these administration policies. It was a wipeout, 8-1 decision. Only, oddly enough, Justice Samuel Alito dissenting. Usually when these 8-1s, it's Thomas. The ruling revised the 2021 policy that set certain priorities for arresting and deporting migrants, focusing on those who are considered threats to public safety and national security. States argued the prioritization left too many migrants with criminal records on the streets, while their cases were under consideration. In his opinion, Justice Kavanaugh shut down the legal basis for the suit, calling it, quote, extraordinarily unusual, and that the state cites no precedent for a lawsuit like this. Joined now by our Homeland Security correspondent, Julia Ainsley. So, Julia, this feels like it's an old-fashioned federalism decision, that it's not about the specifics of immigration, but about who decides immigration policy, 50 states or one federal government?
Yeah, maybe that's the thing that you can actually have 8 justices agree on right now, is that immigration is a federal issue and that it shouldn't go to Texas or Louisiana. We should look, though, at how the Supreme Court allowed Title 42 to stay in place a little longer than the federal government would have liked it to, although that got into public health issues. But what this also sets us up for down the road is that when this Supreme Court believes so heavily that it's up to the federal government and the executive branch to set those priorities, that means the next administration, no matter where they fall on immigration, can make those same decisions. So say you have a hardliner who comes in who says, we're going to try to deport 11 million people, they'll leave that up to them. But they really knocked these states down, not saying that this policy is one they agree with, when Justice Kavanaugh wrote the majority opinion, but just that these states really had no grounds to stand on to tell the federal government how to do its job here.
Does this mean we'll have fewer of these frivolous attorneys general lawsuits that they like to write for press releases to say they're suing the Biden administration?
You'd think so, but we still have a lot of them kicking around, challenging the Biden administration from both the right and the left.
During the Trump administration, it was Democratic attorneys general suing the Trump administration, right? Like these are all, and this was a case where there's headlines and then there's real policy. I think these attorneys generals down in, particularly the Texas one, was always looking for a headline.
That's true, but they really may be sending a message down to lower courts because, as you can see, I mean, Texas at first...
Stop allowing these to happen.
Yeah, at first they did side with Texas and Louisiana. That's how we got here in the first place.
This is 8-1. There's no dispute here.
In other words, you ruled incorrectly, and maybe that'll send a message. Right now, the very policies they have that are keeping those border numbers so low are challenged by the ACLU and by the Stephen Miller types. So a lot more to come.
Well, remember, the real goat in all of this is our friends in Congress who do nothing on this. Thank you.
Well said.
After the break, newly released data about something we've been reporting on for quite a while, a racial disparity in how the VA is doling out veterans' health benefits. The VA now says they're going to address it. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We've got an update on a story we've been following right here on Meet the Press Now for several months. Black veterans being denied VA health benefits more often than their white counterparts. Well, today, the Department of Veterans Affairs announced a new equity team to investigate why this has been happening, why health benefits are granted at lower rates to black veterans. This has been a proof with statistics. Veterans advocacy groups have pressed the VA for more transparency and action on this issue for years, even having to sue them for release of the data that show the discrepancies, some of which the VA released today. Lucy Bustamante of our Philadelphia station, NBC affiliate, has been reporting on both the current and historic inequity issues with VA benefits. Here's a look at some of her reporting from earlier this year.
The GI Bill of 1944 promised all veterans returning home from war an education along with housing and unemployment insurance, all meant to create a strong middle class in America. Historian Richard Rothstein.
In practice, African Americans had very, very little opportunity to use the GI benefits that the GI Bill provided throughout the South. In the North, it was somewhat better.
A study by Brandeis University projects, based on limited available data from the VA, that descendants of World War II veterans lost $80,000 in economic opportunity.
African Americans never gained that wealth, and therefore the effects of that policy still perpetuate the inequality of today.
Well, our Pentagon correspondent, Courtney Kuby, has more on today's announcement. She also covers the VA for us. So, Courtney, you know, there's been a lot of pressure on the VA. This was a VA where Dennis McDonough was the secretary there, was trying to acknowledge, okay, I hear you. Is this that moment? Is this real?
So, and remember, when he came in as the VA secretary 2 years ago, he made this a priority and said that they are going to establish these equity councils and essentially these divisions within the VA that would look at these issues, not just racial, by the way, also looking at LGBTQI, women, even veterans who live in rural areas who may not get the same level of benefits as those who live in more cosmopolitan areas. So, yes, he came in, Dennis McDonough, promising to do this 2 years ago. Well, today, the VA announced that they are officially starting one of these equity groups. Now, one of the things that they will be looking at is the issue of benefits, what you were just talking about there, Chuck. And a lot of our viewers may not exactly understand what this means. So when you leave the military, you become a veteran, you're given a disability rating. And that is essentially an amount of money that you're going to get, a tax-free benefit that recognizes any kinds of mental health or physical problems that you may have gotten because of your military service. The VA will compensate you for that for the rest of your life. Now, according to the data that we just released today that we got from the VA, in fact, we've known for decades that black veterans do not get the same grant level as their white veterans. But we found out that, in fact, as recently as FY23, fiscal year 23, that is still a problem. It's a decades-old problem that is still persisting today. Now, the hope, according to VA officials, is that with this equity council that they're beginning, hopefully they'll get to the root of why this is still an issue, and they'll finally be able to address it, Chuck.
Is there, on these other, how are they going to treat something like the GI Bill at the time with older African-American veterans who may be deceased, but they were denied benefits? Perhaps their relatives deserve these benefits. How is the VA going to handle this?
And that's an excellent question. So one thing that they're doing is they're encouraging living veterans who may have been denied benefits to reapply now. They're hoping that people will come back. One of the things that one of the VA officials I spoke with just today about this said was they're hoping they can re-earn trust with some of these veterans and these communities that have been underrepresented with their benefits. They're hoping they can re-earn some of their trust and that they can help bring them back into the system. But, you know, it's an excellent question about people who have veterans who've passed on and their families who probably won't ever get any of these benefits. Now, another thing that we learned, though, is even though these veterans, the black community, has less of a grant rate, they actually are overrepresented in the number of veterans that do get benefits, black veterans who get these benefits. But that's because they apply at a much higher rate, Chuck. So the stats are kind of confusing, but at the end of the day, black veterans have a harder time getting the same benefits that their white counterparts get still today.
Courtney Kuby with some important developments on how the VA is trying to right a decades-long wrong. Courtney, thank you. Still to come, this is Tropical Storm Cindy with a C. That's right, we're in the C's. It's still June. For us amateur hurricane meteorologists who've lived on the Atlantic Ocean, that's scary. I'm going to talk to the National Hurricane Center director about what to expect to what's been an already active tropical season. Again, not even a month old. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We have seen our share of historically extreme weather across the country this week. In Texas, a tornado killed at least 4 people, injured 10 in the town of Matador Wednesday night. You had a combination of rain, hail, and wind hitting parts of Colorado earlier this week. Several people were hurt when golf ball-sized hail rained down on a concert at Red Rocks Amphitheater Wednesday night. And in the Atlantic, it's been an active start to the hurricane season. Less than 3 weeks into the season, we're already up to the letter C of named storms. Tropical Storm Cindy formed late yesterday and has continued to gain strength as it threatens the Caribbean. Tropical Storm Brett, which left a path of damage in the Lesser Antilles and the Grenadines today. So I'm joined now by Michael Brennan. He is the current director of the National Hurricane Center. And Michael, you'll have to forgive me. Growing up in Miami, I think we all think we're experts. But let me ask you this. It's a El Nino year, which supposedly meant we were going to have fewer storms in the Atlantic, but the Atlantic is warmer. What is going on with these first 3 weeks? How concerned should we be on the East Coast?
Well, we need to be concerned every year, regardless of El Nino or what the seasonal forecast says. Like you said, we have these competing factors this year. We do have an El Nino that's developed in the Pacific. All things being equal, that tends to suppress hurricane activity on the Atlantic side. Although you being from South Florida, you know about Hurricane Andrew.
I know.
An El Nino year in 1992.
Right.
So there's no guarantee that even in a slow season, you're not going to get potentially catastrophic impacts. But like you said, the Atlantic Ocean is warm. The waters out in the eastern Atlantic are as warm as they typically are in August or September. That's why we've seen Brett and Cindy develop in that region well ahead of schedule, as we would expect in a typical season.
Is there anything else contributing to this, or is just simply this is, El Nino? We've never had an El Nino with this warm of an Atlantic Ocean.
That's right, yeah. And so these factors are competing against each other. We're also seeing pretty strong tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa early in the season, and that's something we were anticipating this year as well. And those tend to be the seeds for the most powerful storms we get. So we'll see how the El Nino effects build during the hurricane season, and if they're able to sort of counteract these otherwise what appear to be favorable conditions in the Atlantic.
Since it's not often I get the chance to talk with you as an expert in this, one of the things that it seems like has developed more often in the last, I'd say, 5 years is that we get these tropical systems that feel like they develop out of nowhere from the Yucatan and just sort of shoot up into the Gulf. And all of a sudden, instead of the typical, we get to watch one of these things off the coast of Africa make its way and we decide how seriously to take it, versus one of these are suddenly popping up and in 24 hours you're like, wait a minute, we're 48 hours from landfall and this is a Category 3? What is happening in the Gulf?
Well, I mean, we have seen a lot of storms develop and rapidly intensify, but if you go back actually over the past 100 years, the strongest hurricanes that have hit the United States were all tropical storms 3 days before they made landfall. So these are all storms that develop relatively close to land, and that's a big problem for the Gulf Coast and for the state of Florida in particular. These are storms like Andrew, storms like Laura, Michael, Harvey, and going back to all the way back over the last 100 years. So this is not an unprecedented event. It's just that we've seen a lot of development of storms in the western part of the basin in the last few years. It hasn't been as much activity farther east like we've seen in the last few days. And those storms that they're not all going to be like Irma, where you have 7 to 10 days to watch it come all the way across the Atlantic. And that's a huge challenge for preparedness and just getting people ready to take action.
When it comes to our expectations for this year, considering we're at sea, I mean, is hurricane season really start June 1 and end November 30th anymore, I guess is the easier way to say it? Or are we going to start to have to worry that maybe hurricane season starts May 1 and we got to be prepared for the middle of December?
Well, we do have storms that develop actually any month of the year if you go back in the record books across the Atlantic. And we have seen a few storms developing in late May in the last few years, but we haven't had them in the last 2. So, but June 1 to November 30th still captures about 95% of the activity. And most of the big storms happen August, September, October. That's when really the bulk of the major hurricane activity happens. But you do have to be ready every year. We had a hurricane make landfall in Florida in November last year, if you remember.
I do. And let me finally go to this. For us amateur trackers, what makes the European model seem like it's more accurate at times?
At times, every model sort of has its day in the sun, and these models get upgraded every year. What we use at the Hurricane Center is a blend of the best models, and that outperforms any model individually. Now, the European does really well in some storms in some years. The U.S. model does really well for some storms in some years. You just don't know ahead of time which model is going to be the best. That's why you can't just go all in on any one particular model forecast. I'll just plug the Hurricane Center forecast has lower average error and is more consistent than any individual model. So we really encourage people to look at that. That's why we're there. We're the professionals to help guide you through that.
Well, yes, you are, and you're a lifeline to many folks. Any last words of warning to people on the East Coast this year? I mean, I think it's really important what you just said. The most dangerous storms are the ones that develop out of nowhere fast, which means start preparing now.
Right. Know if you live in a storm surge evacuation zone. That's the first thing. And then also remember that water kills 90% of people in tropical storms and hurricanes in this country. Most people in the last 10 years have died from freshwater flooding from rainfall. And that has almost nothing to do with how strong a storm is from a wind perspective. So remember, it's the water, and you want to evacuate from those storm surge evacuation zones if you're asked to.
Michael Brennan, the head of the National Hurricane Center, really appreciate you bringing your expertise to our viewers. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Chuck.
All right, that's all we have for today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.